The wedding day broke cold and bright over the village of Hollowbrook. A thin mist clung to the low stone walls, and the hedgerows still wet from the night's rain. Bells rang from the chapel tower, 3 slow strokes, and then a 4th that came late, as if the bell-ringer himself were unsure the day would happen at all. Maren Ashcombe stood at the edge of the lane and watched the carriages roll past. Her hands were tucked into the folds of her shawl, and the shawl itself was the colour of weak tea. It had once been deeper, a soft rose brown, but 10 years of washing had thinned it. There was a darn near the corner where her aunt had mended a tear. The stitches did not match. They never had. Maren had stopped trying to hide them long ago. She drew the shawl tighter as a fine carriage rattled by. Inside, a woman with a tall feathered hat turned her head and stared. Maren lowered her eyes. The smell of horse sweat and damp wool drifted past, mixed with the sharp green scent of trampled grass. Somewhere a hen complained loudly behind a fence. "You should go in," said a small voice beside her. It was Tibby, the baker's youngest, no more than 6, with flour still on her sleeve. The bride's already there. I saw her go past in the white one. "I know," Maren said. Her voice was soft. "I am going." "Why are you waiting?" Maren did not answer at once. She looked down at the child's round face and tried a small smile. Sometimes a person needs a moment before they go inside a place full of people. Tibby thought about this. Then she nodded, very solemn. "I do that too. Before church, when Mama brushes my hair too tight." Maren laughed, a quiet sound, the first warm thing she had felt all morning. "Then we are alike, you and I." The child ran off toward the chapel steps, her small boots slapping the wet stones. Maren stood another long moment in the lane. She had not wanted to come. She had told her cousin Petra so, 3 nights in a row, sitting at the kitchen table with the candle guttering low between them. Petra had not listened. Petra never listened. The wedding was the great wedding of the season. The bride was Cecily Marwood, daughter of Sir Rowland Marwood of Greyfield House. And Cecily was Maren's second cousin once removed, which was nothing at all in the country, and everything in town. The invitation had come with Maren's name on it written small, as if the writer had hesitated even as the pen moved. Maren had no money for a new dress. She had no money for any dress at all. What she had was a gown of plain grey muslin that had been her mother's, taken in twice at the waist, and the shawl. The shawl was the only beautiful thing she owned, and it was no longer beautiful. It had been beautiful once, 15 years ago, when her mother had worn it to her own wedding and laughed under it in the rain. Maren remembered that laugh the way some people remembered prayers. She lifted her chin and walked toward the chapel. The path was lined with people, villagers in their best, gentry in their finer best, and behind them all the great families from London who had come down for the country wedding, because Sir Rowland Marwood was a man whose favour mattered. Maren kept her eyes on the chapel doors. She felt the looks. She felt the looks the way one feels a draught through a thin window. "Is that the cousin?" Someone whispered. "The poor one? I heard her father gambled the whole place away before he died. What is she wearing? Oh, do look at the shawl. Is that mending?" "It is. Look at the corner, just there." Maren did not look. She did not slow. She had learned long ago that to turn one's head was to give the speaker a face, and a face was what they wanted. She walked on. The stones under her shoes were cold, and the air smelled of beeswax candles already burning inside the chapel, mixed with the sweet trodden grass and the rain. A bird called from the yew tree. Her own breath came small and steady. Inside the chapel the light was honey-coloured. Long beams fell through the high windows and lay across the pews in pale stripes. The smell of wax was stronger here, mixed with the smell of so many bodies in their wool and silk and the faint dust of old hymnals. Maren slipped into a seat near the back. No one moved to make room for her. No one needed to. There was room enough. She kept her hands folded in her lap. She had a small private habit she did when she was nervous. She would press her thumb against the inside of her other wrist, slowly, and count to 10. It was nothing to look at. It was everything to her. She did it now. 1, 2, 3. The murmurs around her began to take shape. "My dear, did you see her? At the door? In that thing? The bride must have invited her out of duty. Mended at a wedding. I should not have believed it if I had not seen it." The voice that said this last was clear and high and pleased with itself. Maren did not need to turn her head to know who it was. Lady Hester Marwood, the bride's aunt, sat 2 pews ahead. Lady Hester had a long, thin neck and a small mouth that always looked as if it had tasted something just slightly off. She was speaking, as she always did, just loud enough. "One would think," Lady Hester went on, "that if one could not afford something proper, one would simply stay home. It is a kindness to oneself and to others." A small chuckle. A few small chuckles. Maren pressed her thumb against her wrist. 4, 5, 6. She did not lift her eyes. She did not need to see Lady Hester to feel her. The woman gave off a chill like a stone wall in winter. Maren remembered, suddenly, a thing her mother had once said. "There are people, my love, who measure themselves by how small they can make others feel. Do not measure yourself by their ruler. It is bent." 7, 8, 9, 10. She breathed out. The chapel was filling. The organist had begun a low, slow piece, something gentle that moved like water. The doors at the back opened, and a small ripple went through the room. The bride was coming. Cecily Marwood walked down the aisle on her father's arm. She was pretty in a tired sort of way, the way a girl looks when she has been told she is pretty so often she has stopped hearing it. Her gown was very fine, her veil was very long. Her eyes did not lift to the altar. They stayed fixed on a spot just below it, the way a person looks at the floor when they are walking past something they do not wish to see. Maren had not seen the groom yet. She knew his name. Everyone knew his name. He was the Duke of Ardenmere, and the match had been called brilliant in every drawing room from London to the coast. A duke, a real duke, with an estate and a title and a fortune. Sir Rowland Marwood had walked taller for 3 months. Maren leaned a little to one side to see past the feathered hat in front of her. The groom stood at the altar. He was tall, and his shoulders were broad under the dark coat, and he stood very still, the way a man stands who has stood through many things and learned the value of stillness. His hair was a deep brown, almost black, cut neat. His face was turned toward the bride as she approached, and from where Maren sat she could only see the line of his jaw and the corner of his mouth. Then he turned, just slightly, and his eyes moved. They moved past the bride. They moved past her father. They moved across the rows of guests like a man looking for someone in a crowded market. And then they stopped. They stopped on Maren. She felt it the way a person feels a hand laid suddenly on the back of the neck. She did not understand it. She did not understand why a stranger, a duke, a man she had never met in her life, would look at her in the back of a chapel on his wedding day and stop looking. She lowered her eyes at once. When she looked up again, he had turned back to the altar. The bride was beside him now. The priest had begun to speak. The organ had hushed. The chapel had filled with that particular quiet that comes before a vow. Maren's heart was beating in a way she did not like. "Dearly beloved," said the priest, and Maren made herself look down at her own hands, at the shawl across her lap, at the small dark stitches of the mend. She thought, very firmly, of nothing at all. She thought of the rain on the chapel roof. She thought of the smell of wax. She thought of Tibby with the flower on her sleeve. The priest's voice went on. The words were the old words, the words Maren had heard at 100 small weddings in Hollowbrook over the years, only spoken now with more care because of who stood at the altar. To have, and to hold, in sickness and in health. Forsaking all others, if any man can show just cause, said the priest, why these two may not lawfully be joined together, let him now speak, or else hereafter forever hold his peace. The chapel was quiet. It was the quiet that always followed those words. The quiet of nobody ever speaking. A chair scraped. Maren lifted her head. The Duke of Ardenmere had stepped back from the altar. Half a step. Not a flight, not a stagger. A step, like a man who had just remembered something. The bride looked at him. The priest looked at him. Sir Roland Marwood looked at him with the slow stare of a man whose world was tilting. "Your Grace?" said the priest softly. The Duke did not answer the priest. He turned, fully now, and he looked again at the back of the chapel, at the pew where Maren sat with her shawl across her knees and her hand pressed to her wrist. "Maren," he said. The chapel went silent. It was not the silence that had been there before. That silence had been polite, a held breath. This silence was different. This silence was the kind that fell on a battlefield. Heads turned, feathered hats tilted. A woman 2 rows ahead of Maren made a small sharp sound and then was still. Lady Hester Marwood, who had been smiling thinly at her own neighbour, froze with her mouth half open. The Duke had not raised his voice. He had spoken her name the way a man speaks a name he has carried in his pocket for years. Maren could not move. She could feel every eye in the chapel finding her, one by one, the way candles light from a single flame passed down a row. The bride's face, white as the veil. Sir Roland's face, going red. Lady Hester's mouth still hanging open in a small, stunned circle. And at the front of the chapel, the Duke, looking only at her, with an expression she could not read. "Maren Ashcombe," he said, more quietly now. "Is it you?" She tried to speak. Nothing came. The bride turned to her father. The bride turned to the Duke. The bride turned, very slowly, to the back of the chapel. "Who," said the bride, "is that?" Nobody answered her. The Duke walked. He walked down from the altar, past his bride, past the priest, past Sir Roland Marwood, whose hand had risen halfway as if to stop him and then fallen again. He walked down the aisle the way a man walks who has finally found a thing he had thought lost. His boots made a slow sound on the stone floor. His coat moved with him. He smelled, when he came close, of clean linen and rain and something underneath that Maren could not name. He stopped at her pew. She rose. She did not know she had decided to rise. Her legs simply lifted her. "Your Grace," she said. Her voice was small. It was the only voice she had. "You do not know me," he said. "No, you knew me once." She shook her head. "I think you have made a mistake." "I have made many mistakes," he said. "This is not one of them." He looked at her shawl. He looked at the mended corner. His eyes did not flinch. They did not pity. They simply saw. Then he reached out, very carefully, and he touched the corner of the shawl with 2 fingers. Just the corner. The way a man touches a thing he is afraid will not be real. "Your mother wore this," he said, "on the day she carried you in from the river." Maren's breath stopped. The chapel did not move. The priest at the altar had laid his hand on the open book and forgotten it was there. The bride was weeping, silently, without lifting her hands to her face. Lady Hester had gone the colour of old paper. "You do not remember?" he said softly. He was not asking. "You were 4 years old." Maren's mouth opened. "The river." The river behind Greyfield House, where the willow trees came down to the bank. She did not remember falling. She remembered the cold. She remembered being wrapped in something warm. She remembered her mother's voice saying, "Hush, my heart. Hush, hush. There was a boy," Maren whispered. "There was a boy who pulled me out. There was. He was 12. He was visiting. He was." She could not finish. She could not. "I was 12, said the Duke of Ardenmere. "I was visiting my uncle. Your mother gave me this shawl to dry my coat on the walk back. I never returned it. She told me to keep it. She said it had been mended once already, and would be mended again if it needed to be, and that things which had been mended were stronger than things which had not." Maren stared at him. "She is dead now," Maren said. It was not a question. "Yes, 5 years. I know." "How? I have looked for you," he said, "for 5 years." Behind him, at the altar, the bride had begun to sit down. Slowly, carefully, as if her knees had decided the matter for her. Sir Rowland Marwood made a sound that was not quite a word. "Your Grace," Sir Rowland said. His voice was thick. "Your Grace, this is most. The Duke did not turn. "Sir Rowland," he said, still looking at Maren, "I owe your daughter an apology that I cannot make in this room. I will make it. I will make it before the day is out. But I cannot marry her. I should not have come this far. I came because I was told the Marwood family had a daughter and a cousin, and I came to see the cousin, and I was told she would not be at the chapel. I was told she was unwell. I see now that I was lied to." A small choked noise came from Lady Hester's direction. The Duke went on as if she had not made it. "I came down a week ago to this village," he said quietly to Maren only. "I came in plain clothes. I came as a traveller with a sore horse. I stayed at the inn. I have been 3 times to the lane behind the churchyard where I was told you sometimes walked, and I did not see you. And I thought I had been wrong again. I have been wrong many times. I came to this wedding because it was the only place I knew you would be." Maren was crying. She had not known she was crying until she felt the wet on her cheek. "Why?" she said. "Because your mother saved my life once," he said, "and I never thanked her properly. And because I owe her a debt that did not die when she did. And because I made a promise I have spent 5 years trying to keep." "What promise?" He did not answer at once. The chapel waited. 200 people waited. "That is a thing," he said. "I would rather tell you somewhere quieter." He held out his hand. Maren looked at it. It was a large hand, brown from sun, with a small white scar across the knuckle. She did not take it at once. She looked past him, at the altar, at the bride sitting in her white silk with her face in her hands now, at Sir Rowland purple to the collar, at the priest who had quietly closed the book. "Your Grace," she said, "there is a woman at that altar who has done nothing wrong. I know. She will be humiliated. She will be unmarried," he said. "It is not the same. I will not let it be the same. I give you my word." "Words," said Maren softly, "are easy." He looked at her then, and for the first time something moved behind his face that was not control. It was something like a man being struck. "You are right," he said. "They are. I will do better than words. I ask only that you let me try." She did not take his hand, but she rose fully from her seat. She drew the shawl more closely around her shoulders. "I will walk out," she said. "On my own. If you wish to speak with me, you may find me on the lane. But I will not be carried from this chapel as if I were a prize." Something in his face eased. He stepped back a single step to give her room. She walked. She walked down the long aisle the way she had walked into the chapel. But the walk was different now. Now every eye in the chapel was on her. Not on her shawl, not on the mending. On her. She did not lift her head higher than it had been. She did not lower it either. She passed Lady Hester Marwood without looking at her. She passed the bride without looking at her, though as she passed she touched the bride's shoulder with the lightest brush of her fingertips. A thing nobody saw but the bride. The bride turned her face up, eyes wet, mouth open. "I am sorry," Maren said, "for all of this." The bride said nothing, but she did, slowly, nod. Maren reached the chapel doors. She stepped out into the bright cold morning. The mist had burned off, the yew tree dripped. A robin called from somewhere in the hedge. She walked down the path between the staring villagers and the staring gentry, and she did not stop until she had reached the low stone wall where the lane curved away toward the river. There she sat down on the wall because her legs had decided, and she breathed. It was perhaps 10 minutes before he came. She heard his step on the lane before she saw him. He did not hurry. He came to the wall and stopped a respectful distance from her, and he waited for her to look up. "You did not bring your bride," she said. "She is with her father." "And her father is with whom?" "With my secretary," said the Duke, "and with a settlement that I believe will satisfy honour and several other less noble feelings. Cecily Marwood will not suffer. Not in any way that money and a careful letter can prevent. I do not say this proudly. I say it as a fact." Maren looked at her hands. "You speak as a man who has thought about this for a long time. I have thought about little else for a week. And before this week, he said, I had agreed to a marriage I did not want, because I am 34 years old and my mother is ill, and she has asked me to give her grandchildren before she dies. I am not a romantic man, Miss Ashcombe. I do not believe in fate. I believe in promises and in debts, and I had made a promise to a woman who was kind to me when I was a frightened boy, and I had not kept it, and I thought perhaps if I married a good and gentle girl from a respectable family I could live with myself. He paused. Then I came down to this village, he said, and I learned that Sir Rowland Marwood had a cousin in his house who slept in a cold room above the kitchen and was given the mending and was not seated at supper. And I learned her name, and I remembered the name, and I remembered the river. Maren's throat hurt. He is not unkind, she said. Sir Rowland. He simply forgets I am there. Yes, said the Duke. I gathered that as well. A long silence. You came in disguise, she said. I did. Why? Because I have been lied to before, he said. Because when a duke arrives at a country house, every person in that house behaves as they think a duke wishes them to behave. I have never in my life met a person at first meeting. I meet only what they show a duke. I wanted to see, before I did anything, what kind of woman you had become. And what kind of woman did you find? He was quiet a moment. I found a woman, he said, who took an old man's parcel from his hands at the post house 3 days ago, because his fingers were shaking and he could not work the string. I was sitting by the fire. You did not see me. You undid the string. You retied it for him. You did not speak more than 4 words. You did not stay for thanks. You walked out into the rain. The old man sat down by the fire and cried. Quietly, because his wife had died last spring and nobody had touched his hands in kindness since. He told me that. He did not know who I was. He only needed to tell someone. Maren put her hand over her mouth. That is who I found, he said. She could not speak for a long time. I do not know you, she said at last. No, I do not know if I can know you. No, I will not be married because of a debt to my mother. I would not ask you to be. I will not be married because I am poor and you are sorry for me. I am not sorry for you, he said. I am angry for you. That is a different thing. She looked at him then. Truly looked. He was not classically handsome. His nose had been broken once and had set a little crooked. There was a faint line between his brows. His eyes were a grey that was almost green in the light off the stone wall. He looked, she thought, like a man who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and had only now put part of it down. What is your name? She said. Your given name. I do not even know it. Alaric, he said. Alaric Vane. Alaric, she said. The name tasted strange on her tongue. I do not ask you to marry me, Miss Ashcombe. I would not insult you by asking on a lane an hour after I broke off another woman's wedding. I ask only one thing today. What, that you allow me to take you out of Sir Rowland Marwood's house? Not as my wife, as my guest. My mother keeps a small dower house near the coast. There is a housekeeper there. There is a garden. There is a room with a window that looks at the sea. You may stay there for as long as you wish, on no condition of any kind. If you wish me to visit, I will visit. If you wish me to stay away, I will stay away. If after a year you wish never to see me again. You will have a small income from a fund that was set aside for you years ago by someone you do not remember. Maren stared. Set aside by whom? By me, he said, when I was 19. When I came of age, I did not know where you were then. I knew only that your mother had died and that you had been taken in by relations, and I asked my solicitors to find you. And they found a girl of 9 in a country house and a Sir Rowland Marwood who said the child was well and wanted nothing. I believed him. I should not have. You set aside money for me, Maren said slowly, when you were 19. It was a small thing. I had just come into my fortune. I thought of your mother. I thought of the shawl. I thought it was the least I could do, and I told myself I had done enough, because that is what young men with too much money tell themselves. I was wrong. I am sorry. Maren looked away. The robin had come back. It hopped along the top of the wall a few feet from her, head tilted, watching her with one black eye. She thought of the post house. She thought of the old man with the parcel. She did not remember the old man. She had not seen the man by the fire. She had only seen the shaking hands and the string. "Your Grace," she said. "Alaric, Alaric, I will think about your offer. I will not give you my answer today. Today I would like to go back to Sir Rowland's house, and I would like to pack my mother's books, and I would like to sleep one more night in a bed that I know. Tomorrow you may come to the kitchen door, and I will tell you what I have decided. The kitchen door, that is the door I use." He did not argue. He did not say she would not use it again. He simply nodded. "Tomorrow," he said. "At what hour?" 9, I will be there." She stood. She drew the shawl close. He stepped aside to let her pass on the lane. "Your Grace," she said, pausing. "Alaric, Alaric, the shawl. You said you kept it." "I did. For a long time. Where is it now?" He smiled then for the first time. It changed his whole face. It was a small smile and a tired one. "I gave it back," he said. 3 weeks after she gave it to me. I walked the 4 miles to your mother's cottage, and I left it folded on the porch with a note. I was 12. The note said only thank you. She mended it again, I think, for you. Look at the corner." Maren looked down at the shawl. She turned the corner up, the mend her aunt had made, and beside it, fainter, older, a second mend. Smaller stitches. Neater. She had never noticed. "My mother mended this," she whispered. "Yes, twice. At least twice." Maren held the corner of the shawl against her cheek. The wool was warm from the sun. It smelled of wood smoke and lavender and the long years of her life. "Tomorrow," she said. Tomorrow, she walked back to Greyfield House alone. The wedding guests had not yet dispersed. They were standing in clumps on the chapel green, talking in voices that fell when she passed and rose again behind her. She did not hear what they said. She heard the gravel under her shoes and the wind in the high elms. At Greyfield she went in by the kitchen door, as she always did. The cook looked at her once and looked away. The scullery maid, a thin girl of 14 named Briar, came across the flagstones quickly and took Maren's hand. "Miss," Briar said. "Miss, they are saying things. Are they true?" "Some of them," Maren said. "Probably not the worst of them. Are you to be a duchess?" Maren laughed. It surprised her. The laugh was raw and short. "No, Briar, I am not to be a duchess. I am to be a guest, perhaps, in a house by the sea. I have not decided. Take me with you." Maren looked at the girl. Briar had been at Greyfield 2 years. She had come from a workhouse in the next county. She had hands red from lye and a small, hopeful face that did not yet know not to be hopeful. "If I go," Maren said carefully, "and if I find the place is good, I will write to you. I cannot promise more than that. You will forget. I will not forget." "You will. Briar, look at me." Maren bent until her eyes were level with the girl's. "I do not forget the people who stand by the kitchen door." Briar's mouth wobbled. She nodded once and ran off into the scullery before her face could betray her further. Maren climbed the back stairs to the cold room above the kitchen. It was small. It had a narrow bed, a wooden chest, a washstand with a chipped basin, and a single window that did not quite close. She sat on the bed for a long time. She did not weep. She had wept her allowance in the chapel. Instead, she began slowly to pack. Her mother's books, 3 of them. A small Bible, a book of pressed flowers, a book of poems with the binding loose, a wooden hairbrush, 2 muslin dresses, the shawl, which she folded with her hands moving very slowly, the way one folds a flag, a small carved bird her mother had made for her when she was 6, a bundle of letters tied in faded ribbon, which she did not open and did not read. There was not much. There had never been much. She fit it all in a single canvas bag with room to spare. She slept that night badly. The window rattled. The wind off the river came up and worked at the loose pane. She thought of the bride sitting down in her white silk. She thought of Lady Hester's small open mouth. She thought of the old man at the post-house, and tried to remember his face, and could not. She had not looked at his face. She had looked only at the string and the package and the shaking fingers. She wondered how many faces she had not looked at in her life because looking felt like asking, and she had long since stopped asking. She thought of Alaric Vane, 12 years old, wet from the river, standing on her mother's porch with a folded shawl and a note that said only thank you. She slept a little, near dawn. At 9 in the morning she went down to the kitchen door, the shawl about her shoulders, the canvas bag at her feet. Cook was at the hearth. Briar was at the table. Neither spoke. A knock came at the door. 2 knocks, even and firm. Maren opened it. He was not in his dark coat. He was in a plain grey travelling coat, riding boots that had seen weather, and a hat in his hand. He looked as he must have looked at the post-house. He looked like a man who did not wish to be a duke that morning. Miss Ashcombe, Your Grace. Alaric, he looked at the bag. He looked at her face. He did not ask. He simply waited. I have decided, she said. Yes, I will come to the house by the sea, as your guest, under the terms you offered yesterday. He let out a breath she had not known he was holding. Thank you. There is one more thing, anything, I would like to bring Briar. He looked past her at the thin girl at the kitchen table, the scullery maid. Yes, does Sir Rowland know? Sir Rowland, said Maren quietly, will be informed. A small line appeared at the corner of his mouth. It might almost have been a smile. Briar, he said, raising his voice slightly. Would you like to come to the sea? Briar stood up so fast her chair fell. She tried to right it. She tried to curtsy. She managed neither. She nodded fiercely. Then gather your things, he said. We leave in an hour. Maren stepped past him into the kitchen yard. The morning smelled of wet stone and hens, and the first faint salt of a wind that had come up from the east, an east wind, a sea wind. The carriage waited beyond the wall. It was a plain one. A travelling carriage. He had not brought the ducal one. He had not, she realized, brought anything that would mark her arrival as a spectacle. That, more than anything he had said, made her trust him a little. The road to the coast was long. They went the first day only as far as a coaching inn called the Black Hare, and Briar slept the whole afternoon on the seat opposite Maren. Mouth open, dreaming, Alaric rode outside. He did not press his company on her. At the inn he took rooms for the women, and a separate room for himself. And at supper he sat with them but spoke little, and what he did say was about the road and the weather, and a horse that had thrown a shoe. On the second day they reached the coast. The dower house stood on a low hill above a pebble beach. It was a stone house with a slate roof and ivy on the south wall. The windows were many and tall, and one set on the upper floor looked straight out over the water, which was grey that day and silver in patches where the sun came through. Gulls cried. Far below, a fishing boat moved slow along the shore. The air smelled of salt and seaweed, and the sharp green tang of gorse, and Maren stood at the carriage step for a full minute before she could make herself step down. The housekeeper was a stout woman of about 50, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense mouth. Her name was Mrs. Penrose. She took one look at Maren and at the thin girl behind her, and she did not ask any questions. She showed them to their rooms. Maren's was the one with the window that looked at the sea. Briar's was the one beside it, small and clean and warm, with a quilt on the bed that had been pieced from 100 different scraps. Alaric did not stay that night. He did not stay the next. He went on to his own estate further up the coast, which was 2 hours' ride away, and he sent a note the third day asking whether she would receive him to tea. She wrote back, in her plain, careful hand, yes. He came at 4. He sat in the parlour and drank tea, and ate one slice of cake and spoke about the garden, which needed work, and about the village down the hill, which had a fair every spring, and about a horse he had recently bought which had a sweet disposition but was lazy. He did not speak of the wedding. He did not speak of his mother. He did not ask her to be anything. After an hour he stood. "Thank you, Miss Ashcombe." "Maren, Maren," he said. He paused on the word. "May I come again?" "Yes," she said. He came again. He came once a week, then twice. By the end of the first month he was riding down on a Wednesday and again on a Saturday, and his visits had a shape. He would arrive at 4. He would sit. He would drink tea, eat one slice of cake, talk of small things. He would stay an hour and a quarter. He would leave. She found, slowly, that she looked forward to Wednesdays. She did not tell him so. In the second month, on a wet afternoon, the post brought a letter from Briar's old situation. The cook at Greefield had died. Briar, when she opened the letter, sat down on the kitchen floor and put her face in her apron. And Maren held her shoulders while she shook. The cook had not been a warm woman, but she had let Briar sleep by the fire in winter, and she had once given her a sugar lump on her birthday, and Briar had loved her in the small, steady way that children love anyone who does not hurt them. Alaric arrived the next day. He did not arrive at 4. He arrived at noon, in the rain, having ridden hard, and he did not knock at the front door. He went around to the kitchen. Maren heard the back door open. She came down. Alaric was there, his hat in his hand, water dripping from his coat. Briar was at the table, eyes red, sleeves rolled. "Briar," he said, "I am very sorry for your loss." Briar looked up, startled. "I did not know her well," he went on. "But I am told she was a fair woman. I am told she was kind to you in the small ways that matter." "How?" said Briar. "How do you know that?" I asked, he said simply. "I wrote to Mrs. Penrose, who wrote to a friend at Greyfield. It seemed important to know." He set a small parcel on the table. "This is not for you to thank me for," he said. "Mrs. Penrose tells me you sometimes ask after seedlings for the kitchen garden. There are 5 paper packets in here. Plant them where you like. They are yours." Briar opened the parcel slowly. Inside were 5 small folded papers, each labelled in a careful hand. Beans, carrots, cabbages, lavender, and 1 packet that said only, in small letters, "Marigolds, because they are cheerful." Briar looked at the marigold packet a long time. Alaric was already at the door. "I will not stay today," he said to Maren. "I came only for this. Mrs. Penrose has my apologies for the wet floor." He was gone before Maren could speak. She did not learn the rest of it for another week. She learned it from Mrs. Penrose, by accident, who mentioned that His Grace had also written to the new cook at Greyfield to recommend Briar's character should the new cook ever wish for a kitchen girl back, and had also paid a small sum toward the burial of the old cook anonymously through the parish, because the woman had no family and the parish fund was thin. Maren stood very still in the doorway of the still room while Mrs. Penrose, polishing a copper pan, told her this without any sense that she was telling her anything important. "He asked you not to mention it," Maren said. "He did, ma'am. I am mentioning it because I do not consider it gossip. I consider it a fact about the man you are presently keeping company with, and a woman should have facts." Maren did not say anything. She turned and walked out of the still room and out the kitchen door and down the path between the gorse bushes to the wall above the beach, and she stood there a long time, looking at the grey water, with her hand pressed against her wrist and her thumb counting slowly to 10. She was not in love. Not yet. She did not know how to be in love. But something in her chest had moved, the way a stone moves the first time the spring frost lifts it. The 3rd month brought a storm. It came in from the sea on a Saturday afternoon, just before Alaric was expected. The wind rose fast. By 3 the windows were rattling and the gulls had gone to ground. By 4 the lane down from his estate was washed out at the lower ford. He did not arrive. Maren stood at the parlour window with her hands wrapped around a cooling cup and watched the sea throw itself white against the pebbles. She told herself she was watching the weather. He arrived at 7, on foot, having walked the last 2 miles when his horse went lame. He was soaked. He was covered to the knee in mud. He had walked along the cliff path in a sea wind that should have kept anyone indoors, and he had not turned back. Mrs. Penrose took his coat. Briar brought hot water. Maren stood in the parlour doorway and stared. "You should not have come," she said. "I said I would. You could have died on that path. It was not as bad as it looked." It was as bad as it looked. I watched it from the window. He almost smiled. He was shivering. "Then I am sorry to have worried you." "You are not sorry." "No," he said after a moment. "I am not sorry." She sent him to dry by the fire. She sat across from him. They did not have tea. They had soup, which Briar brought in 2 bowls, and bread that Mrs. Penrose had baked that morning. They ate without speaking for a while, and the fire ticked. And the wind ran along the eaves. Then Alaric set down his spoon. "Maren, yes, I have been coming here for 3 months. You have. I will keep coming, for as long as you let me. But I find I must in honesty ask you a question. You may answer or not. You may take all the time you wish. I will not be hurt by any answer." "Ask." He looked at the fire, not at her. "On the day of the wedding," he said, "I told you I had been looking for you for 5 years. That was the truth. I told you I made a promise to your mother. That was the truth. But I did not tell you the whole of the promise." "What was the whole of it?" He was quiet a long while. "When she pulled me from the river," he said, "she had pulled you out first. You were so small she had laid you in the grass and run back for me. I had gone in trying to fetch your bonnet, which the wind had blown off the bank. I was 12 and stupid and proud. The current took me. I would have drowned. She came in for me with all her skirts on. She got me to the bank. She lay beside me a long time and we both shook. Then she sat up and she looked at me. And she said..." He stopped. "What did she say?" "She said, 'Promise me you will look after her. Promise me, if a day ever comes when she stands alone in a room full of unkind people, you will know her.' I was 12. I promised. I promised the way a boy promises, easy and serious all at once. Then she gave me her shawl, and she walked me home, and a year later we left the county and I did not see her again." He drew a long breath. "I did not know, when I made that promise, that I would forget it for nearly 20 years. I did not know that I would remember it only when I was 33 and standing in my mother's drawing room being told to marry a Marwood girl from the very house your mother used to call her home. I did not know that the name would come back to me like a struck bell. I did not know that I would write to my solicitors that night and tear apart every desk in my study trying to find the old file with your name on it, which I found, finally, at 3 in the morning, on a shelf I had not opened in 15 years. I did not know any of this. Maren had set her own bowl down. Her hands were folded on the table. And you came down here in disguise. I came down here in disguise. Yes, to keep a boy's promise. To keep a boy's promise. And now," he looked at her then, "and now," he said, "I find that I would keep the promise even if I had never made it. I find that I would come down this road in a storm whether or not your mother had ever spoken in the grass. I find that I look forward to Wednesdays. I find that I dislike Tuesdays for not being Wednesdays. I find that I have been a man who spoke of facts and debts and promises for so long that I had forgotten there were other reasons one might walk along a cliff path in the rain." Maren's hands had begun to shake. She pressed them flat against the table to still them. "Alaric, I do not ask you for anything tonight. I ask only that you know what I have just told you, so that, when you are ready, if you are ever ready, you will know what you are choosing or not choosing. I would rather you knew it and refused me than not knew it and accepted me." "Why, because I will not lie to you," he said. "I have lied to a great many people in my life, for reasons I thought were good. I will not lie to you." She did not answer for a long time. The fire crackled. Outside the wind made a sound like a thing pacing. "Tomorrow," she said at last. "Tomorrow, come back tomorrow at 4. As you always do. I will tell you then." He nodded. He rose. Mrs. Penrose had made up a room for him, because the lane was still under water, and Maren did not see him again that night. She lay in her bed and listened to the storm, and watched the small piece of sky in her window go slowly pale. In the morning the storm had blown out. The sea was flat. The gorse was dripping. The gulls had come back. He came at 4. He sat in the parlour. Mrs. Penrose brought tea. Briar brought cake. Maren sat across from him and held her cup and did not drink from it. Alaric, yes, I have a condition. Name it. You will not propose marriage today. I had not intended to. You will not propose it tomorrow. No, you will propose it, if you propose it at all, on a day when I have looked at you across a breakfast table for at least one season of the year, and I have seen you in the morning before you have your coat on, and I have seen how you speak to your tenants and your horse and the woman who scrubs your kitchen floor. You will propose it on a day when I have had time to know you the way one knows a person, and not the way one knows a story. That is fair. And until that day, I will live in this house. You will visit. You will not stay overnight unless the weather forces it. You will not buy me dresses. You will not buy me jewels. You will not write me letters that say more than your visits say. I will not. You will continue to use the kitchen door when you wish to. He almost smiled. Yes, and one more thing. Yes, on the day, if such a day comes, when I tell you I am ready, you will not ask me in this parlour. You will ask me in the post-house in Hollowbrook, in front of the old man with the package, and you will say my name the way you said it in the chapel, and you will not be in disguise, and you will not be ashamed. He looked at her for a long moment, and his eyes were the grey-green of the sea after a storm. I will, he said. It was 9 months before she told him she was ready. In those 9 months she walked the cliff paths every morning, and she learned to swim a little in the cold green water of the cove, and she planted Briar's marigolds along the south wall of the dower house, where they came up in a yellow line. She read her mother's 3 books from front to back twice. She wrote to Cecily Marwood, who had married a kind country gentleman 3 months after the wedding that did not happen, and who wrote back a letter that began coolly and ended with a confession that she had never wished to marry a duke, and was, in her way, grateful. Lady Hester Marwood wrote nothing. Maren did not write to her either. Alaric came every Wednesday and every Saturday. In winter he came in a heavy coat and snow on his shoulders. In spring he came with the first cuttings of his mother's hothouse, which he did not give to Maren, because she had forbidden flowers, but which he gave to Mrs. Penrose, who put them in the kitchen window, where Maren saw them. In summer he came in shirt-sleeves with a sunburn across his nose and a habit, by then, of leaving his hat on the bench by the back door because he came in by the kitchen now, whether or not it was raining. His mother did not die. She rallied, in fact, the 3rd month after the broken wedding, and wrote a letter to Maren that was 3 pages long, and asked, in the 2nd page, whether Maren would consider visiting her in town. Maren did not yet, but she wrote back. On a morning in early autumn, with the marigolds still blazing along the wall, Maren stood in the kitchen of the dower house with a cup of tea cooling in her hand, and she said to Briar, I think I should like to go to Hollowbrook tomorrow. Briar, who was now 15 and 3 inches taller and could read a recipe, looked up from the table. What is in Hollowbrook? An old man, said Maren, and a post-house, and, I hope, a duke. Briar dropped a spoon. The next day Maren rode in the plain carriage to Hollowbrook. Alaric did not know she was coming. She had not told him. She had only sent a note that morning that said, in her plain hand, meet me at the post-house at 3. She arrived at 2:30. She sat on the bench by the fire. The old man was there. She had asked after him, by letter, twice that year. Through Mrs. Penrose, his name was Mr. Toller. His wife had been Esther. He had been a wheelwright. He took a long moment to recognize her. When he did, his face crumpled in the small way that old faces do when kindness arrives unexpectedly. Miss, he said. Miss, you came back. I did. I have wondered. I know. I am sorry it has been so long. She held his hand a little while. The fire ticked. The post-house smelled of warm tea and old leather and the faint sharp smoke of the chimney. Outside, hooves on the cobbles. Alaric came in at 3 exactly. He did not see her at once. He saw the old man, and he nodded to him, and the old man nodded back. And then Alaric saw Maren on the bench, and he stopped where he was. She rose. He crossed to her without saying anything. He did not take her hand. He stood 3 feet from her, with his hat in his hand, and he waited. "Alaric, Maren, I am ready." He breathed out. It was a long breath, the kind a person breathes when a thing they have been carrying carefully for a long time may finally be set down. "Here," he said softly. "In front of Mr. Toller. Here, in front of Mr. Toller," the old man, who had not been told what he was witnessing, but had a long life behind him and could read a room, sat very still on his bench and folded his hands. Alaric did not kneel. She had not asked him to kneel. He simply looked at her, and he said her name once more, the way he had said it in the chapel a year ago. "Maren Ashcombe." "Yes, will you marry me?" Yes, that was all. There was no kiss in the post-house. There was only the small sound of the kettle on the hob, and Mr. Toller, who had begun to cry quietly into his sleeve, and a robin that had got in through the open door and was hopping along the windowsill looking for crumbs. They were married in the spring, in the chapel at Hollowbrook, by the same priest who had closed the book a year before. The chapel was less full this time. Lady Hester Marwood was not present. Sir Rowland Marwood was, with his head bowed and a stiffness in his shoulders that did not entirely leave through the whole of the service. Cecily was there, with her kind country husband, and she kissed Maren on both cheeks at the door afterward and said, "I am glad. I am truly glad," and Maren believed her. Maren wore a dress of pale grey silk that Mrs. Penrose had helped her sew. Over her shoulders she wore her mother's shawl, mended twice, mended now a 3rd time by her own hand, because the spring before she had caught it on a thorn in the marigold bed. The new stitches did not match the old ones. They never would. They were her own. When the priest said the words about lawful joining, the chapel was very quiet. No chair scraped. Nobody stepped back. Alaric Vane held Maren Ashcombe's hand the whole way through, and his hand was warm and steady, and when he said his vows he said them low and clear, like a man who had practiced them not in front of a mirror, but in his own head for a year and a day. The breakfast after was small. The dower house could not hold many. Briar, in a new dress that was not so very new but was hers, served the cake she had baked herself, and burned only one edge of it, and was forgiven by everyone. Mrs. Penrose cried twice, and pretended both times she had something in her eye. Mr. Toller, brought down from Hollowbrook in Alaric's own carriage, sat by the fire with a cup of tea, and told anyone who would listen the story of the day a quiet young woman had retied a parcel for him without speaking, 3 winters before, when he had thought he could not bear another day. Alaric's mother sat on the settle by the window with a rug across her knees and watched her son. Once, when Maren passed her, she caught Maren's wrist gently and pulled her down to whisper in her ear. "He has been mended too, my dear," she said, "by you. Do not let him forget." "I will not," Maren said. The old woman patted her cheek and let her go. It was almost dusk by the time the last guest left. The dower house grew quiet. Briar, exhausted, had been sent up to bed. Mrs. Penrose was in the kitchen, humming washing cups. Alaric and Maren stood at the open back door, looking at the sea. The marigolds were not yet up. The gorse was just beginning to flower. The air smelled of salt and turned earth, and the faint sweetness of the cake still on the table. "Mrs. Vane," he said quietly. "Your Grace," she said, and laughed. He laughed too. It was a small sound. It was the sound of a man who had not laughed easily for many years and was beginning to learn how. He put his arm around her shoulders. Through the shawl she could feel the warmth of his hand. She leaned against him. They stood that way a long time, not speaking, while the sky went lilac and then grey over the water, and the first stars came out. And a single late gull called once and was answered, faintly, from somewhere down the coast. In the kitchen, a copper pan caught the firelight. On the windowsill, the cuttings from his mother's hothouse had bloomed at last, 3 small white flowers in a chipped blue jug. Maren drew the shawl close. She thought of the chapel a year ago. She thought of her thumb pressed against her wrist, counting to 10. She thought of a small girl named Tibby, with flour on her sleeve. She thought of an old man crying into his sleeve in a post house. She thought of her mother in the grass beside the river, soaked to the skin, telling a frightened boy to remember. She had not been forgotten. She had been mended, like the shawl, by hands that had loved her, and by her own hands, and now by his. And things which had been mended, her mother had said once, were stronger than things which had not. She turned her face up to him. He was already looking down at her. "Inside," she said softly, "before the night turns cold." He nodded. He did not kiss her on the threshold, where Mrs. Penrose might have seen. He waited until they had crossed the parlour and were alone by the dying fire, and then he set his hand against her cheek, and he kissed her, once, the way a man kisses a thing he has carried in his pocket for nearly 30 years, and only just learned how to hold. Outside, the sea moved against the pebbles. Inside, the house was warm. Thank you for staying with this story until the very end. If this moved you, please like, share and subscribe. Your support keeps these stories alive.